Hey everyone, Jarretman here. Playing against some 200 Blitz on ACR. See if we can get some interesting spots. So versus hijack versus min raise, even with this, so again, if you watch my last video, I mentioned that I'm using this as kind of like practice, and I'm going to play as if there wasn't this very, very high rake, and we're going to call pocket sixes versus min raise. We're not going to fold versus hijack. We would roll it for a low frequency 3-bet though. Over here, I'm assuming this guy is a recreational player, considering he's from the US, no offense, and cold calling a 3-bet. So yeah, we're going to call here. 4-betting is not very attractive in this spot, in my opinion. Now here, I think he makes a very small mistake and goes to a size that's a little bit too small. When the button calls you, they have a good hand, basically, when the button calls the hijack. And if you go to this size, we're not really folding any hands, including pairs. We're getting a good price. And yeah, that's about it. But once we do face the bet here, we're going to fold. Easy fold. Table 1's pretty interesting now. So I wouldn't read too much into this guy having a necessarily strong hand. And this opponent can absolutely check a trap type hand. However, with exactly pocket 10s, I prefer just going for quarter, and I guess we're going to fold if he goes for the check raise. I think that he's more likely to check raise an overpair better than 10s than he is to check raise something like, you know, an actual bluff. I think he's more likely to bet the hands in this scenario with something eligible to check raise than he is to actually check raise himself. So, not to mention 10s is probably fine to bet fold. This is getting interesting here. It's close between checking back to allow him to bet rivers when he has stuff like queen jack of diamonds, you know, king jack of diamonds, stuff like that, and betting ourselves to get value from pocket 5s types hands. And I think I prefer checking back to get value from those type of hands. This card's actually pretty bad. That's actually a really bad card. It's a really bad card, and he's snap bet 75%. I do think he's got a lot of ace queen, king queen of spades, king queen of hearts, queen jack of hearts, queen 10 of hearts type hands. For bluffs, he has king jack of spades, king jack of diamonds, king jack of hearts, maybe ace jack of hearts. I don't know if he would bluff those, to be honest. And then he's also got some spazzy type hands like 5-6 suited, 5-4 suited that didn't bet the flop, 10-9 which we block, jack 10 which we block. I think the spot is really close, and I'm leaning towards call just because I don't know anything about this opponent. I don't know how wide he would be calling pre. There's some recreationals that could even have ace-9 off here, and they could float the flop and then bet the river. He's just ripping a queen. I mean, he's ripping it pretty well. He's ripping a queen pretty well. I expect a lot of ace-queen here, to be honest. Okay, we're going to call. We're going to call. I expect ace-queen a lot, but it's okay. We're going to call. Okay, that I did not expect, and that's why I called. That's why I made the call there. Yeah, because when you have a recreational player, you never want to really... you don't want to arrange them too rigidly, because you can be surprised at what they show up with. And I think that's a perfect example. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what he was putting me on there, to be honest. I forget if 3-6 suited versus a 3x open is still a defend. I think it might be a fold. We don't have to find out, which is good. Bit annoying that I wasted my time bank. I do prefer to have a larger stack. I should probably just turn off run it twice as well, as there's more. You're more likely to have a larger stack if you run it once. Just so we can play deep and I can practice playing deep. This guy's name is Bill's Mafia. I wonder if I know him. Country tells are a pretty big thing on ACR. You very rarely see recreationals that aren't from the US, to be honest. Okay, so I'm going to assume that this guy is a recreational player, considering that, again, he's from the US and he called a 2.5 open from the small blind. I like checking this hand back here on the flop. There's some value for... Okay, we'll open it. There's some value from hands like pocket sevens, pocket nines. Six, 7, 8, 7, 8, 9, Jack 10, 10, 9. Even maybe like pocket fives might call us. But I think there's slightly more value in checking it back and either bluff catching or betting later streets. This is too thin, but I'm going to do it. I do expect a lot of pocket sevens, maybe ace 8 suited, ace 8 off even, depending on what type of recreational this could be. Now he can have a worse 10 as well, like those other 10x, 9, 10, 9, maybe 10, 7 suited, Jack 10. Then we get called by pocket threes. Okay, so I think we win the maximum there. Whereas if we bet the flop, maybe, you know, obviously being results oriented, we're just going to fold 10-8 off with this rake structure. And considering we get a new hand with recreational players. Can even lead versus some recreational players here. We're going to make a very nitty fold on the flop versus a perceived recreational player who min-raised under the gun and then bets big this flop. He can absolutely just have, you know, queen jack, king queen, king jack type of hands and just bet the flop, especially if he has one spade. However, those types of hands are likely going to barrel the turn. We really have no visibility, no realization. I don't necessarily think this is a fold, but we're going to fold. Versus a regular, I think we're in a tougher spot. Sometimes the 600 zoom and 1K zoom runs on ACR. I haven't been able to play it much, but if I catch it running, because usually at night I'm playing normal tables, and it only runs at night. So whenever I used to play zoom, at least on stars, I would just play in the morning, kind of like a warm-up, or for fun, or because nothing else is running. But yeah, sometimes the 600 zoom and 1K zoom runs at night. So if I'm feeling up for it, I might record a video of myself playing that. So versus the min raise on the button, the rake really disincentivizes calls. But again, I'm going to play, first of all, they're both from the US. Sorry, US people. It's just statistically more likely to be fun players on this website when you're from the US. There are a lot of US regs as well, but anyways, my point is that we can call basically every pair profitably versus min raise in the small blind, and we're gonna use this as an exercise in practice and not try to make the highest win rate possible at 200 blitz, which if we were trying to do that, we can likely just fold this. Probably. I don't know. I haven't run pre-flop sims for this reg structure. So I expect the button to hit a lot of ace-x. He also just has some total air, like Jack 10, that couldn't see about the flop because it's too bad. The big blind has full range still. I don't think, even if he's allowed to, I doubt people are playing leads, so we're not going to do anything crazy with pocket fours here. We want at least like a 7 or an 8. Maybe something like king 7 suited would be in our calling range, something like king 8 suited. Yeah, I don't think we need to go too crazy. There's also a minuscule chance that we check to the river and win. He has king queen. He has something that just decides not to bluff. He can absolutely still have an ace, by the way. Think of all of the ace-x that he has on the turn, that it's a little bit thin to bet those. Even something like ace-king is not it's not super attractive to bet. And we do win. He has king jack, king queen. Okay. Close versus small size here on the king 10-8 board with pocket twos. I think we'll fold. Oh, that's a very easy decision. We have a recreational in the small blind. I'll still mix in a low amount of 3-bets. Okay, we rolled a 3-bet. But for the most part, I would just prefer calling. But in this spot, I do want pocket sevens in my range, low frequency amount of the time. Absolutely no reason not to, especially when the flop's going to have a 7. Just a very easy range bet board here. About as dry as they come. We have the king X advantage. Not much to say about that. So again, we have this dynamic of we have 2 recreational players left to act behind. So if this hand would ever mix folds, I would not mix folds, for example. I would just call. But I'm still going to roll it for a 3-bet some of the time. If they check to us here, we're going to start with a bet. I think that this board, even though the big blind has an advantage in nut combos, because we don't have 6-8, we have a huge overall range advantage because we don't have any bad hands in our range. We could bet bigger on this board as well. My hand is fine to do whatever. And I'm going to triple off here unless he donks. I just like the spot to triple off. It's very easy. Okay, he does donk. One of the reasons why I like the spot to triple off is because they donk when they have certain hands. So he could have something like Jack 10 or just a random 6 or an 8 and go for the donk. But versus the donk, I'm less happy to like raise and then blast off. So this guy's opening to 3x and he's from the US. He might be a recreational. I don't know. Very easy range bet board again. If we get check raised, my hand is actually a pretty nice 3-bet on the flop. Blocking king jack suited, blocking pocket jacks, which are his main value for check raising, along with pocket 5s, but okay. Yeah, he's indeed a recreational. Versus a recreational, I'm just going to bet. I'm not going to roll. I guess we're going to call. I don't necessarily know what he's donking here, to be honest. In case there is just random air, I kind of want to keep that in rather than raise, especially with a hand like Queen Jack. I don't expect Like, I don't expect to get anything better to fold if I do raise. We could raise the turn here. I do not expect him to ever have ace-king. He could have king-queen and is just betting because he doesn't want to check. He could also just have a spaz. I do beat random air still. Something like 6-7 suited that just decided to bet. So maybe we just want to call river. How much like ace-10 and ace-queen does he have that just bets the flop and then bets the turn? I don't think much. Like, I expect more 7-6 suited than I do ace-queen, ace-10. But again, I'm having trouble ranging this spot. If he shoves, we'll fold. If he bets like half pot, I think we're gonna call. I don't believe that he just shows up with, okay, check, we have an easy check back. Now I actually do expect to lose to some random ace-x that stabbed the flop, to be honest, but I don't expect shoving to outperform checking back. I don't know if we actually do get an ace to fold. Okay, so he did just have a total spaz, which is why, again, I prefer calling the turn there. Just open it versus this guy. That's why I prefer calling the turn rather than raising the turn, because raising the turn only outperforms calling it if you get some better hands to fold or if you deny some equity, and I think that the consistency of his, not consistency, what his range consists of is basically air, or basically just air. Sometimes he hits an ace, which I don't think he's going to get to fold. Which I don't think I'm going to get to fold. Man, talking is hard. Okay, this is interesting here. We're in a very high EV spot. So he calls small blind and then calls our squeeze. So he, again, we don't want to range him too narrowly. He can have any pair. He can have suited broadways. He can have, I don't know. I think the highest EV line here is to bet the flop pretty small. Not too small, though, because we want the pot to be a little bit bigger. And then we just shove the turn. That's just the very clear highest EV spot. We want to make the pot as big as possible on the turn for him to fold, but still allow him to call stuff like eights no heart, or I don't know, fives with a heart, you know, stuff like that. Stuff that we want the size of our bet on the turn to allow us to fold out the hands that called the flop still. That's what I meant. And now we just have an easy shove, and we hope he doesn't have king queen off. And it worked. We got a good turn, but I think it would have worked even on a brick. Another option there is to just shove the flop. However, I think it's higher EV to just build a bigger pot for yourself on the turn and then shove them on the turn. It'll just gain you more. And like these little subtleties between plus EV actions add up a lot over time. So versus min raise, we're gonna play calls again in the small blind. On a 92, we will 3-bet though. This hand will not fold, it'll call or 3-bet. Even without a recreational player behind, we're gonna play calls in the small blind. Again, if I was trying to beat this game for the highest win rate possible, I probably wouldn't play calls from the small blind, as the amount of EV gained is completely degraded by the rake, and you get to see a new hand when you fold. However, that's not why I'm playing. Should be checking a lot on this board. We have an easy fold versus big bet. This is an interesting size on this board. It makes sense for a 5, but it doesn't really make sense for a king. Okay, we roll 3-bet here. Versus larger size openings when you're out of position, from the big blind, you want to be 3-betting more often. I'm sure I've said that before. So I would 3-bet pocket sevens at a higher frequency versus 3 big blinds than I would versus 2 big blinds. Okay, we get called. We get called from the small blind, and this board, I think, I don't know at 50 big blinds, but I know in 100 big blinds, he never has a 2 unless it's pocket 2s, and all our overpairs are strong enough to bet like overbet. So I think we can just overbet on this board, but overbet or check. Versus this guy, we're just going to bet sizes that pairs are never going to fold, and I think that even recreationals might consider folding a pair versus overbet on the flop. So once we bet big on the flop, it's hard for him to have a total air float, so I don't mind raising him on the turn. But there's not many bad cards for our hand as well. I don't expect a king or an ace in his range at all, so if that comes on the river, I can still bet. However, I lose value. But just in case he's got some sort of spaz, and I'm going to stack a jack unless the river's a king or an ace anyways. So I think call is slightly better. Woo! Didn't matter what we did there. With the small blind in there, I prefer just betting like quarter. If the small blind wasn't in here and I was just versus the big blind, I would play like a really big better check. Just make sure that we are recording. Yep. Easy fold. Lovely sip of lukewarm coffee. So small blind's range should be very, very pair weighted here. I would actually be surprised if he overcalled anything that's not a pair. In reality, I mean. Big blind should be folding probably more than they're aware, but we shouldn't read too much into it. This board is still much better for me. I'm the only one who has pocket kings. I have more king jack than everyone. Usually when I'm like 4 or 5 ways, I won't bet, but considering here we are second in position and we do still have a nut advantage because we open from hijack. If we open from cutoff, I would just check range this spot. But opening from hijack or low jack, I don't mind throwing in a little 1 big blind bet on the flop sometimes. I would just play this size or check, really. And with my hand, I just prefer betting it. We will fold or call on table 2. We're not really 4-betting jack 10 suited in those positions. And we're not always calling it. Okay, when I get raised from the big blind, I'm actually still pretty happy. If I got check raised from the small blind, I would expect just pocket 3s or a bluff. But when I get check raised from the big blind, he could have jack 3 of hearts that called pre, even though he's probably supposed to fold that when it goes call. And he can have king 3 suited. So yeah, I do prefer just calling though. It sucks that I have this guy left to act behind, but I feel if I 3-bet the flop, we're kind of giving him the opportunity. We're giving him an opportunity to even fold with something like jack 3. I don't think it's that crazy for someone to fold jack 3 on the flop facing the 3-bet in this scenario. And when we call, if he does have some sort of bluff like queen 10, 10, 9, spades, ace 10, ace queen, we give him the option to blast off. Once he takes this line, I'm kind of surprised. So on the flop, he was saying he has jack 3, king 3, pocket 3s, or some sort of bluff. And then he bets this kind of, or king jack, obviously, but now he bets this size. Obviously, we're just calling, but I don't know what he has. I'm struggling to see what he has. Like, I guess he has pocket threes is what he's repping now. I mean, jacks would pure squeeze pre. He could have king three. He could have pocket threes for value, and then for bluffs, I guess he could just be barreling something like. We have the same hand. Okay, boring. That makes sense, but the size on the turn is still a little strange. We'll roll it for a 3-bet sometimes. Low frequency. On a 58, we'll call. I see no reason not to just mix here. I don't think that raise outperforms call or call outperforms raise. I do think that we should do both. I'm not going to be having any leads on the spade. All of the Broadway combos are still available of spades. Same thing over here. We'll a 3-bet sometimes. And I have similar feelings to the river. I don't feel like any size outperforms any other size. So we're just going to roll between check, block, overbet. I feel like, though, if I block, I'm not really accomplishing too much. So I think I actually do prefer just overbet or check. Check, we could go for the check raise. However, he doesn't have too many hands to check back, turn bet, river that are pretty natural. We'll just fold the jack-8 suited versus under the gun. It's a decent flop to check raise because he's got to be a little careful on that flop. However, yeah, our hand's pretty bad. I think his hand just needs to fold versus overbet. He had queens with no spade. I think you can pick your calls 160 big blinds deep. We'll just fold ace-10 off. I think you can pick your calls a bit better. Yeah, we'll squeeze this. Yeah. When I have a player that's in position on me, left to act still, again, I want to go a bit bigger. We don't want him to be able to just profitably call every single hand that called. When he calls from the cutoff, even a recreational, it's going to be tough for him to have like a bad hand. Unless he's a very special type of recreational. In that case, then I might want to go a bit smaller, because then I don't even mind him continuing. Like Queen Jack suited would be very good versus that type of player. I could mark all these people regs at this point, to be honest. Might as well. I don't think there's ever been a recreational player from Armenia in the history of poker. I think this guy's a reg too. I'll go through with my HUD at some point and mark people. Versus what I assume is a recreational player, I'm going to just start with a bet. This is a card he should lead. He's got a massive 8x advantage. I think this spot is closer to leading range than it is checking range. When I bet the flop for that size, I'm really just saying I have like overpairs or, of course, you know, bluffs. At 150 big blinds deep, I'm not sure if I want to 3-bet to the large size or the small size. I think it's deep enough that I want to go to the small size. Didn't matter, he folded. We're going to check back here on table 1. He did tank and then check, which means maybe he did consider leading, but if you know your opponent didn't consider leading, then we would just check back, basically range here. The only way you can bet is if you know your opponent considered leading and then checked. Kind of sucks, but now I don't see a lot of value in betting to get called by like pocket 9s, pocket 7s, a 5 when this run out happens. So we're just going to check back and mostly win. We'll fold there. So if this board was king 8-3, we could bet range for a small size, and it would be GTO, but specifically king 7-3, it kind of misses the threshold of offsuit hands we open from the button. We don't open 7x off like as much as we do 8x off. So we will have some checkbacks. I'm going to play some checkbacks. Ace-9, absolutely fine to check back. Table 2, I slightly, when I'm in these positions, I prefer playing big bet or check on this board. My hand can absolutely bet. It's so bad that it performs well as a bet, and it's got decent properties to triple off. Table 1, we're going to check it down. Too thin to value bet. Yeah, his check down's absolutely fine. He's never really supposed to win, but he does chop versus Queen Jack sometimes, I think. And because this guy is likely a recreational, we're going to call Jack 5 suited. And he called the small blind, not like the button. But these types of hands, they become much worse when another player is involved. Okay, I was right. But when the other player involved is a recreational, they become better to call because every hand becomes better to call because they're more likely to make mistakes post-flop. Nothing to do but call with pocket 6s here. So if he checks, we have an interesting decision. If he bets, we have just a very simple just call. If the board was rainbow, we could consider having a raising range on this board. When it's flush draw, it's less of a thing, although I don't mind it. Yeah, so he does check. I do think we have a bit of an interesting decision here. Just trying to think if there's any reason to check back considering to betting. We would have to bet call. This hand is not going into the bet fold, that's for sure. I don't really see any reason other than to just randomize it in this spot. However, versus certain player types, if I had stats on them, I would go with that, to be honest. I just don't on that person. Gonna be cold 4-betting here. These are the types of hands you could consider bluffs that we will have in our cold 4-betting range. Ace queen suited, king queen suited, those types of hands. Ace 5 suited if you're in position. If you're out of position, usually not so much, unless you have a reason to do so. King 10 off is not strong enough to do anything even from the button, even with the recreational behind. Same thing with 8-9 suited. If I was on the button, I might consider calling versus the recreational. So we have an interesting decision here. I'm a little bit afraid of when they're like shorter stacked of the jam, so I kind of prefer kind of prefer calling rather than wasting this as a 3-bet fold, as versus a recreational player. I don't really care if I have pocket sevens in my 3-bet range ever. It doesn't matter. And the only reason we 3-bet it pre is so that we can have some pocket sevens in our range. And if that's no longer a concern, it's more profitable as a call in this spot. We have a very clean set draw, but I don't really care. We still have a player left to act behind who could raise. And I expect we're behind, and if we're ahead, I expect to get barreled off this hand. So into the muck. I'm not saying it wasn't close. I think it was kind of close, but if we were heads up, I would consider it more. I would probably always call if we were heads up. Yeah, we're going to be wrapping this video up. So yeah, let's play these last two hands. Okay, so we get 3-bet, we're deeper, we're obviously just going to call. I'm not using this in my 4-betting range. This guy's just a reg, I don't know much about him. I'm assuming he'll have a pretty normal 3-betting range. It's definitely harder for him to play as we're deeper than it is for me to play, so that's something going for me. I will say this, when I do flop a 10, it's probably a little bit too thin to go crazy for value when you're deeper. Like, the deeper you get, the less you want to go crazy with the 10. Whereas if you're 100 big blinds deep, sometimes in these spots you can just go crazy with the 10 because a 10 is the nuts sometimes. For example, in the check call line. In the check call line here, a 10 is basically the nuts. So, however, when you're deeper, people tend to take more pot control-y lines when they have hands, and it becomes a lot thinner. Less of their range is like ace king and 9s and 8s and stuff like that. Even in this line here, it becomes a little thin to just go bet the turn, bet the river. I think, for example, if I bet the turn here and the river was a deuce, while in theory maybe this would still go for it, I feel like I wouldn't. So given that, I think we're going to check back the turn. I think there's slightly more value in getting his random stuff to bluff on the river, not to mention hitting a queen we now beat, like ace-queen and king-queen. Whereas if I had 10-9, I would be more inclined to just bet the turn pure, for example, like 10-8 suited or 10-9 suited. But with jack-10 or queen-10, when we still lose to stuff like king-10 that pot controls, ace-10 that pot controls, pocket jacks I could even see pot controlling, and now we just have an easy call. And yeah, so we did lose a little bit less. Not really, actually, because we would have bet the turn and checked back the river. But the point is, I'm not surprised to see that type of hand in his range. Whereas if we were 100 big blinds deep, maybe he would just go for the bet. Anyways, that's it for this video, guys. I'll see you in the next one.